Right now, somewhere inside your body, a war may have already started. You can't feel it. There's no symptom, no pain, nothing a doctor would catch on a routine scan. But if you have felt truly alone for long enough, not for a night, but for weeks, for months, then your cells have quietly begun to change. Your immune system is rewriting itself, and what it's doing, on paper, looks unsettlingly like the early stages of a slow death. This is not a metaphor. We can measure it now. And the answer to what loneliness actually does to a human body is far stranger and far darker than the word lonely makes it sound. Let's start with a number that sounds made up. In 2010, a psychologist named Julianne Holt-Lunstad at Brigham Young University did something nobody had done at this scale. She didn't run one study. She gathered 148 of them. She pulled together data on more than 300,000 people, tracked over years, and asked a single brutal question. Does being socially connected actually change how long you live? The answer was yes. People with strong social ties had a 50% higher chance of surviving the study's follow-up period than people who were isolated. Not happier, not calmer, alive. Then she did the comparison that made headlines around the world. She lined loneliness up against the killers we already fear. And she found that lacking social connection carried a risk to your life comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Read that again. Being alone, chronically, did roughly what a daily pack of cigarettes does. Now, scientists still argue about that exact comparison. Some think it slightly overstates the effect. But here's what almost no one argues about anymore. The direction is real. Loneliness doesn't just feel bad, it shortens lives. A follow-up analysis covering more than 3 million people found that social isolation raised the risk of early death by around a quarter, on its own, independent of every other factor. And for decades, that's where the story stopped. A spooky statistic, a correlation. Lonely people die sooner, we just didn't know why. But that's only half of it, and what comes next is the part that should genuinely disturb you. Because in the last 20 years, scientists stopped asking whether loneliness affects the body and started looking directly inside the cells of lonely people. What they found wasn't a vague decline. It was a specific, repeatable, almost surgical change. The work came out of UCLA and the University of Chicago, led by a geneticist named Steve Cole and a neuroscientist named John Cacioppo. They drew blood from chronically lonely people and read the activity of their genes, not which genes they had, but which ones were switched on and which were switched off. And the lonely had a signature. In their white blood cells, the soldiers of your immune system, one set of genes was turned up, the genes that drive inflammation. And another set was turned down, the genes that fight off viruses. Think about what that means. The body of a lonely person quietly shifts its defenses. It dials up the inflammation that, over years, fuels heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And it dials down the very system that protects you from infection. They saw the same pattern not just in humans, but in isolated monkeys. They gave it a name. The conserved transcriptional response to adversity. Loneliness, it turns out, is not just a feeling that lives in your head. It is an instruction that reaches all the way down into your DNA and changes what your cells are doing. So here's the obvious question. Why? Why would evolution build a feeling that, if it lasts, slowly destroys the person feeling it? That seems insane. A self-destruct button buried in the human heart. And this is where the usual story gets it exactly backwards. Because most people treat loneliness as a flaw, a weakness, something embarrassing to admit, like you failed at being a person. But Cacioppo spent his career arguing the opposite. Loneliness, he said, is not a malfunction. It is an alarm. And it's one of the oldest alarms we have. You already trust alarms like this. When your body runs low on water, it doesn't politely inform you. It creates thirst, a feeling unpleasant enough that you'll stop whatever you're doing to fix it. When you run low on food, it creates hunger. When you're in danger, it creates pain. Loneliness is the same kind of signal. It is hunger, For people. For almost all of human history, being cut off from the group wasn't sad. It was a death sentence. Alone, you couldn't hunt large animals. You couldn't sleep safely. You couldn't survive an injury or a hard winter. The humans who felt a sharp, painful jolt when they drifted from the group were the ones who hurried back and lived. The ones who didn't feel it wandered off and vanished from the gene pool. So you are descended, every single one of you, from the people for whom isolation hurt. That ache you feel when you've gone too long without real contact, that's not you being broken. That's 100,000 years of survival machinery doing exactly what it was built to do, pulling you back toward the fire. The problem is what that alarm does when it can't be switched off. Because here is the cruelest part of the whole thing. The trap that closes around chronically lonely people. When the loneliness alarm fires for too long, it doesn't just make you want company. It changes how your brain reads the world. It puts you into a state of threat. A lonely brain becomes hypervigilant. It starts scanning other people not as comfort, but as danger. It reads neutral faces as colder than they are. It expects rejection before it arrives. It braces. And so the lonely person, the one who most needs to be pulled back toward other people, becomes the one who flinches away from them, pulls back first, reads the room as hostile, and protects themselves by withdrawing, which deepens the isolation, which intensifies the alarm, which sharpens the threat response all over again. The researchers saw this in the data too. Loneliness predicted those cellular changes a year later, but the cellular changes also predicted more loneliness a year later. It feeds itself. A loop with no obvious exit, running quietly in the background of a life, tightening one turn at a time. A signal that evolved to save you, firing in a world that no longer answers it. Because you can now go days without speaking to a single person who knows you, surrounded the entire time by millions of strangers. So no, loneliness is not weakness. It is not in your head. It is an ancient survival instinct, screaming a warning it was designed for, in a world we built specifically so that it would never have to stop screaming. And the strange, almost unbearable part is how simple the off switch is. Not friends in a feed, not numbers on a screen. A real conversation, a hand on a shoulder, someone who would notice if you didn't show up. Your cells are still keeping score. They're counting the people who are actually there. They have been counting since before you were born, since before any of us had words for it. And every one of us is walking around with that same ancient instrument inside the chest, quietly measuring the same thing it has always measured: how alone we are. And waiting for an answer most of us have forgotten how to give.